Because in a nutshell, what Mount Rushmore did was it built on land that the government took from the indigenous people. The Black Hills is where Mount Rushmore is located, and that site in particular was considered extremely sacred to the indigenous people. Given the recent news headlines, I thought I would do a reaction video based on the history of Mount Rushmore. I remember when I was younger learning about this in history class, I was just absolutely amazed by the sculptural quality of Mount Rushmore. And as I got older, I recently learned the forgotten history behind Mount Rushmore. And today I thought I would share the knowledge that I have learned from my own research. Now, as always, when I conduct research, I always use credible sources. I will link all of the sources I used down below if you want to read up further on the topic. Let's just get right into it. The architect and sculptor who designed Mount Rushmore, his name is Gutzon Borglum, and essentially what he did is he revived the ancient Egyptian practice of carving gargantuan statues of political figures in natural formations of rock. Now, the good that Borglum has done is he completely invented new modern methods that took advantage of the capacity of dynamite along with jackhammers to remove several quantities of stone away from the site. And essentially this style of architecture is called rock-cut architecture. This is not a new style of architecture at all. We have seen this across the globe and across generations and centuries. Rock-cut architecture, by definition, is the creation of structures, buildings, and sculptures by excavating solid rock where it naturally occurs. Rock-cut architecture is designed and made by man from start to finish, meaning that obviously this does not occur naturally. Mount Rushmore is a prime example of this. So is the Crazy Horse Memorial. Fun fact, Crazy Horse Memorial is still under construction to this day in the Black Hills, the same location where Mount Rushmore is. And essentially it depicts a Dakota warrior, Crazy Horse, riding a horse and pointing into the distance. This monument has been under construction since 1948. Additionally, the Great Temple of Abu Simbel, massive rock temples in Egypt, known as the Nubian monuments, are a prime example of ancient Egyptian rock-cut architecture. The Jain cave monuments in India is also an example. Even in Turkey, these are tombs that were cut in cliffs along the river. Now, if I wanted to make an analogy of what Mount Rushmore did to the indigenous people of North America,
this is the best I came up with.
We all know the Parthenon. A lot of people flock to the Parthenon on a yearly basis to see it. Essentially, the Parthenon was the religious center of life in the powerful Greek city-state of Athens. It served as a church and then a mosque.
And then eventually, Turkish occupation of Greece ended up taking materials from the Parthenon to use for other architectural projects instead of mining out their own.
To make a poor analogy, what we did to living Native Americans in North America would be like if hypothetically these Greek people were ripped out from this sacred land on which the Parthenon sits and putting a McDonald's there. We worship fast food in the United States, so. Because in a nutshell, what Mount Rushmore did was it built on land that the government took from the indigenous people. 2, the Black Hills is where Mount Rushmore is located, and that site in particular was considered extremely sacred to the indigenous people. 3, the monument celebrates European settlers. And as we all know, European settlers completely massacred so many Native Americans, it's not even funny. Now let's talk about the background of Mount Rushmore. State historian Dwayne Robinson conceived the idea of Mount Rushmore National Memorial in 1923. And the reason why Mount Rushmore is located where it is because he wanted more tourism to encourage people to visit South Dakota.
So the only reason why Mount Rushmore completely desecrated sacred land to the indigenous people
is because South Dakota wanted to generate more tourism income. Now, essentially, this is good. He wanted to create a monument memorializing the indigenous people of America and also the pioneers of America. However, it was architect Borglum who said no. Now, he was tasked with designing the monument and he eventually convinced Robinson, no, let's memorialize the 4 presidents who completely changed the landscape of the United States of America. And he picked 4 presidents to sculpt on the Black Hills. So George Washington, fun fact, he owned slaves. Abraham Lincoln actually holds the record for hanging the most indigenous people in one day. He also chose Thomas Jefferson, and another fun fact, he has owned 600 slaves in his lifetime. And lastly, Theodore Roosevelt, who regarded slavery as a sin by aristocratic Englishmen. Now, the construction of Mount Rushmore began on October 4th, 1924. A few hundred workers used dynamite, jackhammers, and chisels to remove the material from the mountain. Additionally, Mount Rushmore was supposed to include a hall of records. Borglum wanted to include a grand entrance to an 80-foot by 100-foot vault to be carved in Abraham Lincoln's head. He envisioned that the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution, other important documents like that, would be stored in Abraham Lincoln's head in this vault. However, with lack of funding and the looming war in Europe, this was never actualized, and Borglum ended up dying all of a sudden, so construction finally ceased. Now, I wanted to go into the history of the Black Hills for the indigenous people. Essentially, groups of indigenous people would travel to the Black Hills for a sacred prayer journey. The site is, quote, from which Mother Earth breathes. It is considered the womb of Mother Earth and the location of ceremonies, vision quests, and burials. This journey has happened for centuries. Now, in history class, they'll tell you that they made multiple treaties with the indigenous people to guarantee the safety of their sites and land would be preserved and not touched by the pioneers and new group of settlers. However, in 1872, the US government sent 2 commissioners to renegotiate this treaty, and this is because there was gold discovered in Montana. Long story short, the treaty was kind of just ignored, and $9 trillion worth of gold was mined and excavated from the Black Hills region. In 1888, all the indigenous people of North and South Dakota were forced onto reservations away from the Black Hills, away from their spiritual sites, away from their pilgrimage journeys. On June 30th, of 1980, the people of the Seven Council Fires and various Native American clans filed a complaint with the United States Supreme Court. And funny thing is that the Supreme Court found itself at fault, saying that America has severely wronged these people. However, the federal government later argued that they cannot give this sacred land back to their people because Mount Rushmore was already present on this land. To the United States, Mount Rushmore is now considered, quote, a sacred site and a monument of American power. To quote, the desecration of the Black Hills is indicative of the violation of the sacredness of who we are as people. As indigenous peoples, we are guided by spiritualism of greater powers than humans. We don't seek equality, we seek justice. This is who we are, and this is where we came from. Now, within the United States, Mount Rushmore is viewed as a celebration of these 4 presidents. However, long story short, Mount Rushmore is a desecration of a sacred site for the indigenous people of the Americas. This is a place where creation began. I went over the architectural impact, and the only good thing I see that Borglum has done is he brought back an ancient Egyptian practice of rock cut architecture, which hasn't really been used in modern times. I don't know what America can do to right this insanely wrong. This is a really important conversation to have. If you are motivated to visit Mount Rushmore, I would not spend money there. I mean, as an architecture student, I'm all for preserving the sanctity of buildings and monuments, but it has to have the right background story. Mount Rushmore was an amazing engineering feat. However, you've seen multiple photos of natives going viral on Facebook giving the middle finger to Mount Rushmore because that was their sacred land. Now it is a huge debate as to what the United States should do, because now we do view Mount Rushmore as a national landmark. However, I don't think that ground is sacred. It just represents the atrocities the United States government has done to the indigenous people in America.